A day in the life of a medieval gambler, before the first card falls. Tonight, we won't ride with kings or storm the gates of glory. No, tonight, we slip through the side door, into a world that smelled of smoke, sweat, and something suspicious in the stew. A world where truth bends easily, and luck is just another name for timing. This isn't the story of a hero, it's the story of a gambler, one of many. A man with dirt on his boots, charm in his smile, and just enough coin to sit at the table, but not enough to lose. So, take a breath. Let the weight of your day melt away, lights low, sounds soft. You're not in your room anymore, you're in a medieval inn, and someone, somewhere, is about to make a mistake. And as we settle in, I'm placing a quiet little wager, not on dice, not on cards, but on whether my voice puts you to sleep or leaves you wondering if the stew was poisoned. A quiet word before we begin. If you enjoy these tales, a simple like or subscription is always welcome. It helps keep the fire in this inn burning. For any story requests, the comments below serve as our quiet message board. Either way, we begin. The gambler's awakening. He doesn't wake up so much as resurface, like something once submerged now reluctantly drifting toward light. There's a sound nearby, the thud of a boot hitting the floor. Not his boot. Then a creak, a cough, and the soft flutter of a chicken who has, once again, found its way inside. He opens one eye. The ceiling is crooked. The light is grey. It might be dawn, or just the moon pretending to be useful. He shifts slightly on his bench. His bed for the night, his third this week. The pillow was his coat, folded once, then abandoned halfway through the night. His back protests. His pouch is still on his belt. He checks it anyway. It's lighter than he'd like, but still there. Good. He stretches, slowly, carefully, like a man trying not to wake regret around him. The inn is breathing. Soft snoring under a table, the scrape of someone stirring ashes in the hearth, the unmistakable splash of stew being reawakened for breakfast, a muttered curse from behind the bar, then the slap of a spoon being fished out of yesterday's pot. Marjorie's up then. He should thank her later. He won't. The gambler sits up. His joints sound like dice in a cup. He adjusts his belt, smooths his shirt, and lets his fingers rest briefly on the cards in his sleeve. Still there, still warm, still waiting. He doesn't smile, but there's a curl at the edge of his mouth, a kind of agreement between him and the day. He stands, quietly, unnoticed in a room full of people, pretending not to notice anything. That's the trick of it. That's the gift. A man who moves like he belongs, even when he walks toward the fire. Breakfast will be nothing worth remembering, which is exactly what he wants. The less people remember the morning, the easier the evening becomes. The setup, tools and targets. Upstairs, tucked beneath a slanted beam and a patch of ceiling that leaks only on odd days, he kneels before his pouch like a priest before relics. Not gold, not trinkets, just tools. Weighted dice, worn smooth from years of sweat and slight. A deck of cards, corners curled like old secrets. A length of invisible thread, a sliver of mirror, a toothpick, whittled into something that isn't quite innocent. Every item has a role, every role a lie, and every lie practiced to a whisper. He unfolds a tunic, neither fine nor filthy, the sort of garment that inspires trust in fools and indifference in watchmen. Boots with dust from 3 towns back. A belt looped twice to suggest it once held more. He washes his face in a basin that smells faintly of iron and forgets, and when he looks in the mirror shard, he sees a man who has never cheated, only outwitted. Downstairs, the inn stirs louder now. New voices, stiff with pride or dulled by travel. The clink of mugs, the shuffle of hands too eager to hold coin. He listens, still unseen, and takes the measure of the room by sound. A laugh too forced, a cough that masks a lie, a sigh that carries loss. To others, it's noise. To him, it's music, every note a signal. He takes a seat in the corner, in partial shadow, but close enough to the fire for his face to be readable and warm. He orders ale, not to drink, just to hold. It gives his fingers something to do while his eyes work. One man boasts about trade routes he's never walked. Another whispers about a noble's scandal with the urgency of gossip disguised as prayer. A boy clutches dice like they've never betrayed him. They will, and then he chooses. Not victims. No, that word is too sharp. He chooses participants. A cloth merchant with more gold than sense, a squire with something to prove, and a purse that sags with silver. A peddler, clever enough to watch, foolish enough to try. They don't know it yet, but they've joined the show. The gambler takes a long breath, not to centre himself. He's already centered. It's to honor the rhythm. Every good performance needs a beginning, and this one begins when the merchant laughs too loudly at his own joke and slaps a coin on the table. The bait, as always, is confidence. The hook, timing. Afternoon bluff. The stew has settled, the bread has been gnawed, and most of the lunch bowls are empty or forgotten. The goat, mercifully, is asleep beneath a bench. It is now mid-afternoon, a time when bellies are full, judgment is foggy, and coin pouches feel a little looser than they should. The gambler returns to his seat, now with company, a merchant whose rings are louder than his wit. A squire flushed from ale and the illusion of maturity, and a woodcutter with the slow, dangerous calm of someone who knows how to split more than firewood. The cards appear. Not proudly, not with flair, but casually, as if they've always been there, waiting. The first hands are simple, small bets, laughter, boasts. Someone folds too soon, another too late. The gambler loses on purpose, then wins by accident. At least, that's how it looks. It's not about the money, not yet. It's about rhythm, getting them to speak, to trust, to miscalculate. He watches everything. The merchant's fingers tapping when he bluffs, the squire's breathing pattern, the woodcutter's silence, and always Marjorie, circling nearby like a hawk pretending to be busy. She knows the game, but says nothing. That's part of the agreement. As long as no blood is drawn and the goat remains unharmed, she lets it play out. A few onlookers begin to hover, leaning on stools, sipping ale slower than usual. The gambler leans back, lets a coin dance between his knuckles. Fate, he murmurs, is just a drunk with good aim. The squire laughs too loudly. The merchant nods sagely, as if he's heard this before. The woodcutter narrows his eyes. The stakes grow, not by pressure, but by suggestion. A free round here, a silver coin there. No one notices how quickly they forget the stew. The squire tries to bluff and fails gloriously. The gambler folds again. He sighs, just enough to seem honest. Not defeated, just tired. It works. They smell blood and they think it's his. Then the mood shifts, not with thunder, but with tension. The gambler's smile fades, just a little. His voice softens. One more round, he says. Let's see if luck favours the bold. The squire bites, always the squire. The merchant follows, pride outweighing caution. The woodcutter grunts. The cards fall, one by one, like whispers. The gambler barely looks at his hand. He doesn't need to, because by now they're no longer playing cards. They're playing him. Supper and showdown. Evening descends slowly through the open shutters, through the flicker of oil lamps, through the way the barmaid's voice drops a little lower. The day's last light catches the dust in the air like old gold. The gambler has moved only slightly. The others? They've changed chairs, stances, expressions. Their coin purses are lighter, their confidence heavier. A few have taken breaks to stretch, which means, of course, to whisper strategies they won't remember by morning. The stew is ladled again, warmer than expected, spicier than before. Supper in this inn isn't just a meal, it's a reset, a last chance for fortune to tip. Mugs are refilled, bread is passed around, harder than earlier but now dunked in ale to soften. The gambler eats quietly, slowly, calculated. While the others fill their stomachs, he sharpens his edge. Then someone says it. Double or nothing. It's always someone. Tonight it's the squire. Face flushed, voice proud, hands trembling just enough. The table stills. The merchant hesitates. The woodcutter raises an eyebrow like a man checking the strength of an axe handle before a swing. The gambler smiles, slow as syrup in winter. If you insist. The final round isn't like the others. There's no laughter now, no commentary, just cards, clinks, and the occasional distant snore from the hearth. The bard, halfway through tuning his lute, senses the tension and wisely plays nothing. Marjorie pauses, ale tray in hand, watching like someone who's seen too many endings. The bets rise. A ring. A dagger. Even the goat somehow becomes collateral. The gambler never blinks, not once. And then it ends. The gambler lays his hand down last. The cards fall in perfect silence. No gloating, no flair, just inevitability. The squire stares, the merchant curses. The woodcutter mutters something that sounds like admiration or threat. Marjorie exhales. She goes back to work. The goat is spared. The gambler gathers his winnings, some coin, some favours, one pair of very fine boots he doesn't need, but accepts anyway. He thanks them all with a nod so small it borders on sarcasm, then stands, stretches, and says, "I suppose luck wasn't done with me after all." Nobody speaks, but in the language of defeated men, silence is a round of applause. Nightfall. Tales, tankards and tension. Night presses against the windows like a beggar with cold hands. The fire is at full glow now, licking the edges of the hearth with the urgency of something trying to be more than warm. The inn's ceiling seems lower at night, and the tables closer. Not because the room has changed, but because people have. Supper is gone, but tankards are not. Laughter returns, but it's slower now, looser around the edges and carrying stories that no one would dare tell by daylight. The gambler sits with one leg up, half listening, half watching. A merchant talks about a baron who mistook a chamber pot for a baptismal font. A sellsword tells of ghosts on a battlefield, conveniently after his third ale. None of it matters. Not the truth of the tales, but the rhythm of them, the cadence of a room winding down. A bard attempts a song but forgets the second verse halfway through and improvises a limerick about turnips and heartbreak. It works better than expected. A small cheer goes up. Even the goat bleats, which might be applause or indigestion. Either way, no one minds. The gambler allows himself a moment of softness, just a moment. He pulls a small wooden token from his pocket. Not a coin, a carved chip from a much older game. He rubs it between his fingers like a prayer. No one sees it, no one needs to. Then, near the fire, someone leans in and mutters, "Cards. Just one more game." Not loud, not demanding, just persistent. The gambler looks up. It's the woodcutter. His eyes are clear now and sober. "No stakes," the man says. "Just pride." The gambler nods. Cards again, slow, deliberate, no tricks, no thread, no tilt of the table, just a pure, quiet game between two men who've already won and lost enough today. Outside, the wind kicks dust along the road. Inside, time folds in on itself. No one watches. No one dares disturb this ritual. They play and play until the fire dims and the last mug is dry. And when it's over, neither of them counts points. They nod. Once. That's enough. Midnight whispers. Upstairs and unspoken. The fire's glow has dulled into embers, quiet, red and pulsing like the last heartbeat of the day. Most mugs are empty now, though a few fingers still cradle them like charms against the dark. The laughter has stopped, not because anyone said so, but because the room has entered that hour where noise feels like intrusion. The gambler moves slowly, without flair, without sound. He nods at Marjorie, who says nothing but slides a key across the counter. It's for a shared room, of course. Privacy is a luxury reserved for lords and liars, and he is only one of those things. The stairs creak like they've been warned. Upstairs, it's warm, but not comfortably so. It's the kind of heat that comes from too many people and too little air. Straw-filled mattresses line the floor, some neat, most not. Shapes under blankets, cloaks folded as pillows, a pair of boots tucked beside someone's cheek. Someone is already snoring, a sound like a saw through wet wood. Someone else is whispering in their sleep about debts unpaid and kisses stolen. No one responds. The gambler finds a corner. Far from the window, close to the wall, not out of fear, but habit, he lays his coat down first. Then himself. The floor is hard, the blanket damp, and the air thick with sweat and stew memory. He breathes through his mouth and thinks of nothing. That's the trick to sleeping in rooms like these. Think nothing, feel nothing, trust a cough, a creak, a footstep in the hall that never resolves into a door opening. Just the old building remembering how to groan. Somewhere, a candle flickers out. In the dark, he lets his fingers find the wooden token in his pocket, the one no one ever notices. He holds it, not for luck, but for weight. Because sometimes even a con man needs to remind himself he's still here, still real, still breathing, in the stale dark among strangers. He listens to the snoring, the whispers, the silence, and finally he sleeps. Sort of. And again, reset and repeat. Before the light arrives, sound does. A low grunt from the stairs. The clatter of something wooden falling but not breaking. Then the unmistakable bray of the inn's mule, followed by the sharp bark of someone realizing they stepped in something unpleasant. Again, the gambler stirs. Not quickly, not fully, just enough to register that the world has continued without asking his permission. He opens one eye. It's still dark, but not night dark, that blue knack shade of almost morning when you can't tell if you're too early or just too tired. Someone nearby is snoring into a pillow that was once a boot. Someone else is already gone, their bedding folded, their scent still warm on the straw. The gambler doesn't move yet. He listens, not for threats, for rhythm. Downstairs, the first pots are moving, not banging, not crashing, just shifting. Marjorie is already up. Of course she is. There are voices too, new ones, fresh, crisp, travellers who've just arrived or who never really stopped moving. He finally sits up, runs a hand through hair that refuses to be neat, blinks twice, feels the wooden token in his coat pocket and smiles slightly. Still there. Still him. He doesn't stretch, he doesn't groan, he simply stands, rolls his shoulders, checks his pouch, still light, still enough. By the time he descends the stairs, the common room is halfway to chaos. New faces, same patterns. A noble trying to sound modest, a merchant trying to sound rich, a peasant trying not to sound like either, a goat under a table, chewing yesterday's regrets. The gambler takes his old seat, orders nothing, waits. A bard starts tuning a lute. A hand slaps a table. Coins clink. And the gambler, without smiling, without blinking, reaches into his pouch and lays the first card again. The woman who played better. The day unfolded as usual, slow, warm, predictable. The gambler had his usual table, his usual half smile, and his usual confidence, sharpened by routine and just enough coin to make him believe the day would end in his favour. But near late afternoon she arrived. Not with noise or colour, but with that quiet gravity some people carry when they've seen more than they say. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Her eyes scanned the room like someone selecting a chapter to reread, not out of nostalgia, but precision. When she finally joined his table, it was without fanfare.
"Room for one more?"
she asked. He dealt her in, already sure of his edge. The first hand she lost, barely. The second, a draw. The third, she played a quiet raise that made him hesitate and then fold. It wasn't luck. She didn't play for thrill or show. She played with weight, with knowledge. Her gaze never wandered. Her hands moved with purpose. His misdirections missed. His charm bounced off her silence like stones on ice. By the fifth hand, he wasn't reading her, he was reacting. And she didn't need to bluff. She didn't even need to win big. She just needed to win once and walk away, which she did. She gathered her modest winnings, gave him a single nod, respectful, not smug, and vanished into the night. He didn't follow. He just sat there, staring at the cards as if they might explain what just happened. And in that silence, he realized something. He hadn't been beaten, he'd been reminded. There's always someone better, and when they show up, they don't need tricks. The day the cards refused. It started small, a dropped card, a missed flick of the wrist. Harmless, maybe unless your entire trade depends on fingers that never fail. By late morning, the inn felt colder. People glanced, but didn't approach. The squire found another table. The merchant claimed he had accounts to settle. Even the talkative tanner avoided eye contact. The gambler shuffled solo, tried to stay casual, but his hands betrayed him. A slip here, a clumsy deal there, and worst of all, the dice didn't listen. Eventually, a small game formed, just a pair of farm boys and a sleepy apprentice with calloused hands. He thought it would be easy. It wasn't. The apprentice noticed every twitch. One of the lads called a perfect bluff. The other laughed at his feint. "You blink too fast," someone said, not meanly, just observant. That was worse. By mid-afternoon, he excused himself, feigning thirst, retreating to the hearth as if the warmth might realign the rhythm. But deep down, he knew the spell had broken. It wasn't the money he'd lost before. It was the way the room looked at him, curious but cautious, like they were remembering things they'd overlooked. A trick here, a coin that vanished too fast. The charm he wore like a second coat was threadbare now, and no one, not even the innkeeper, met his eyes. Not because they hated him, but because they'd stopped being entertained. Justice in the square. They came at dawn, when the mist still clung low and footsteps echoed louder than voices. 2 guards, thick-set and half awake, rapped once on the inn door. "You! Up!" That was all they said. He didn't argue. He'd heard rumours, complaints whispered by men who'd lost more than coin. The merchant with the bent nose, the squire's brother, someone important enough to matter. That was all it took. The square was still when they led him in. The pillory stood waiting, flanked by early risers pretending they weren't here to watch. His name was never shouted. No list of crimes, just a nod from the steward, a gesture to the iron hinges. The wood creaked, his arms slid into place, the latch snapped. A few murmurs. "Liar, swindler, took my uncle's last silver." An apple hit the ground nearby. Soft, not thrown with anger, just disappointment. He stared straight ahead. Not proud, not ashamed, just still. 3 bells would mark the sentence. Public shame, no more. It could have been worse. In some towns, hands were lost, tongues, even heads. Here, he only had to endure silence. And silence, oddly enough, was louder than scorn. When the wood finally lifted, his limbs were numb. He stepped down slowly. No one cheered. No one cursed. The crowd had already begun to dissolve into errands and errands to be. At his feet lay a single coin. Silver. Ordinary. He didn't know who left it. Maybe no one. Maybe it fell. But he picked it up anyway, tucked it into the fold of his cloak and walked off without a word. Not to flee, not to vanish, just to find a place where the cards might still listen. The letter he never sent. It was past midnight, long after the fire had turned to ash and the last clink of mugs had faded into memory. The inn was quiet, in the way only old buildings can be, wooden beams creaking like they were whispering to themselves. The occasional sigh from a dreamer upstairs, and the soft, steady breath of the goat sleeping by the hearth again against all orders. At the far end of the room, lit only by the low glow of a dying candle stub, sat the gambler. He held no cards, no coins, just a scrap of parchment and a stick of charcoal. His hands, usually so quick to palm or flick, now moved slowly, deliberately. He wasn't writing to anyone in particular. Not to a family, none he knew of, not to a lover. Those never stayed. He was writing because some nights, silence demanded a voice, and lies had no one else left to listen. He began with a line he'd used many times at the table. "I never meant to cheat, only to win." Then paused, crossed it out, started again. "I once thought the game was the only honest thing in my life. You play, you risk, you lose, or you don't." He scribbled without looking up. "But it's not honest, is it? Not when your fingers are quicker than truth. Not when the game is tilted before the first coin hits the wood." He thought of the faces. Those he'd beaten. Those who deserved it. And those who hadn't. He remembered the old farmer who lost 2 weeks' food money in a single toss. The noble's son who stormed out and never returned. The child who watched it all and learned too fast. The letter rambled, talked of years on the road, of inns with leaky roofs and worse stew, of nights slept under wagons and days spent hiding from the wrong kind of men. But between the lines, something softer took shape. A boy who once watched dice tumble from a stranger's hand and thought, "I could do that." a teenager who learned too quickly that charm fed the stomach faster than labor. A man who, despite every game won, still counted his worth by the weight of what he carried. And it was never enough. He signed it with no name, just a drawing of a 5-pointed die, edges smudged like they'd been rolled one too many times. Then he held the parchment over the candle, watched the edge curl, then darken, then disappear in a soft plume of smoke. He didn't watch it all burn, just enough. Then he leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and let the quiet hold him. Outside, dawn was still far away, but for once, he didn't mind the waiting. The making of a gambler. No one is born a cheat. The road to becoming one is long, winding, and usually begins not with a game, but with hunger. In the medieval world, where luck often meant the difference between supper and starvation, some learned early that skill with words or with dice could fill a belly faster than honesty ever could. Most gamblers didn't start at the table. They started in the alleys behind taverns, in stables sweeping straw, or at market stalls watching coins pass from hand to hand with too much ease. Some were former soldiers, wounded or disillusioned, looking for a war they could win without swords. Others were orphans, beggars, wandering clerics who'd memorized the Psalms but not the rules. There were even monks who'd traded their vows for loaded dice, and all of them shared one thing, a talent for watching people closely and lying even better. To survive in this world meant knowing your odds before the first move. The church frowned heavily on gambling, labeling it sinful, a gateway to theft, violence, and even murder. But that didn't stop anyone. In fact, sometimes being banned made it more appealing. A man who couldn't afford bread would still risk his last coin on a game of hazard, because a win meant warmth, and losing only confirmed what he already knew. Life wasn't fair anyway. Some learned the trade from watching, some were taught. Small travelling groups, performers, tricksters, grifters, sometimes took in promising apprentices. They didn't teach morals, they taught misdirection. How to mark a deck with grease from a chicken wing, how to weight a die with wax, how to fake a loss before delivering the killing blow, and more importantly, how to disappear after. Being a gambler wasn't just about playing games, it was performance, a story told with hands and eyebrows and a glance across the room. It was reading the table faster than the table read you, knowing when to press, when to fold, when to make them think they were winning. The best never needed to cheat, at least not every time. They let others dig their own graves, then offered the shovel with a smile, and yet it was never a job with a pension. No gambler retired rich. They either disappeared one day or became someone else entirely. Some grew old in smaller towns, running quiet inns or pretending to be merchants. A few found faith, a few lost their minds, and most simply vanished, their stories fading like smoke over dice. Being a gambler wasn't just about playing games, it was performance, a story told with hands and eyebrows and a glance across the room. It was reading the table faster than the table read you, knowing when to press, when to fold, when to make them think they were winning. The best never needed to cheat, at least not every time. They let others dig their own graves, then offered the shovel with a smile, and yet it was never a job with a pension. No gambler retired rich. They either disappeared one day or became someone else entirely. Some grew old in smaller towns, running quiet inns or pretending to be merchants. A few found faith, a few lost their minds, and most simply vanished, their stories fading like smoke over dice. The medieval games of chance. If you walked into a medieval tavern and saw men hunched over a table, coins in hand and voices low, you were witnessing more than just idle play. Gambling wasn't a hobby in the Middle Ages, it was a full-blown cultural undercurrent, equal parts thrill, superstition, and survival. And while the rules were often made up on the spot, the games themselves were as serious as sermons. The most popular of them all? Hazard. Played with 2 dice and nerves of steel, Hazard was a game of wagers, strange terminology, and devastating odds. A player called the caster would choose a main number between 5 and 9, then they'd roll, hit the main, win, miss it, well, it gets complicated. There were long rules, arcane combinations, and many ways to lose, but that was the point. It looked fair, but the house always knew better. To survive in this world meant knowing your odds before the first move. The church frowned heavily on gambling, labeling it sinful, a gateway to theft, violence, and even murder. But that didn't stop anyone. In fact, sometimes being banned made it more appealing. A man who couldn't afford bread would still risk his last coin on a game of hazard, because a win meant warmth, and losing only confirmed what he already knew. Life wasn't fair anyway. Some learned the trade from watching, some were taught. Small travelling groups, performers, tricksters, grifters, sometimes took in promising apprentices. They didn't teach morals, they taught misdirection. How to mark a deck with grease from a chicken wing, how to weight a die with wax, how to fake a loss before delivering the killing blow, and more importantly, how to disappear after. Being a gambler wasn't just about playing games, it was performance, a story told with hands and eyebrows and a glance across the room. It was reading the table faster than the table read you, knowing when to press, when to fold, when to make them think they were winning. The best never needed to cheat, at least not every time. They let others dig their own graves, then offered the shovel with a smile, and yet it was never a job with a pension. No gambler retired rich. They either disappeared one day or became someone else entirely. Some grew old in smaller towns, running quiet inns or pretending to be merchants. A few found faith, a few lost their minds, and most simply vanished, their stories fading like smoke over dice. Because in the end, the gambler's life wasn't really about the gold or the games. It was about control, in a world where control was rare. For a few fleeting moments, with the right trick, you weren't a peasant or a beggar or a man with nothing. You were the one who knew, who chose, who won. Until, of course, the day you didn't. The gambler's code. No one ever wrote it down. There was no parchment, no charter, no gilded scroll hidden behind a tavern wall. But every seasoned gambler, from the stews of London to the crossroads of Flanders, knew the unspoken rules. The code. Rule 1. Never play drunk. A gambler might fake the stagger, slur a few words, even fall out of his chair for show, but his mind must be sharper than a barber's razor. One slip, one careless tell, and the game was over. Rule 2. Never cheat the desperate. It wasn't morality, it was survival. The man who wagers his last coin doesn't walk away empty. He comes back with a stick, or worse, a friend with a sword. Take from the proud, not the poor. Rule 3. Know when to lose. No one trusts the man who wins every time. Better to bleed a little early. Let them taste victory. Let them believe. Then, when the stakes are real, when the coins pile high and the eyes glaze with confidence, that's when the real game begins. Rule 4. Never return to the same place too soon. Faces remember, so do debts. A good gambler was always on the move, never rooted, never local. Local men answer to local justice. And the final rule: never fall in love at the table. Eyes betray more than hands. The moment your heart leans, your fingers follow, and someone always notices. These weren't laws, they weren't taught, but they were known. Passed between glances in smoky rooms, shared in grunted warnings after close escapes, carved into memory through failure. Break the code, and you wouldn't need the law to find you. The game itself would. The apprenticeship, teaching the game. He never meant to teach anyone. That wasn't the plan. The game had always been a solitary craft, a dance of fingers, whispers, and quiet winds. But sometimes the road gives you more than new towns. Sometimes it gives you someone who watches too closely. He was maybe 15, dirty-faced, hungry-eyed, and too quiet for his own good. He watched every throw, every glance, every sleight of hand like a monk studying scripture. Never asked questions, just watched. Until one night, after the crowd had gone and the stew had burned, he asked, "How did you know he'd fold?" The gambler didn't answer right away. He just handed the boy the dice. Throw. The boy threw and missed. Again and again, until his hands steadied, until he saw the dice not as toys, but as instruments, weighted in one pocket, honest in the other. Lessons came slow: how to mark a card corner with wax from a candle stub, how to palm a coin while pretending to fumble, how to fake surprise without blinking. But he didn't just teach tricks. He taught the feel of a room, how silence was louder than laughter, how some players played to win and others to be seen, how to spot a guard in disguise, or worse, another gambler hunting the same mark. At first, it felt like passing on a trade, a small act of mercy, but mercy is a tricky thing. You never give it without losing some part of yourself, because the boy got better, too fast. He started to test the rules, took risks the gambler wouldn't, played with greed, not precision, until one night, the boy didn't show up. Word came a week later. He'd tried to cheat a tax collector's man. They found his cards and little else. The gambler said nothing. He didn't change towns, didn't stop playing, but he never took on another student. From that point on, if a child asked him how the game worked, he'd smile softly and answer, "It doesn't, not for long." The king's law and the gambler's trial, it was bound to happen. Sooner or later, every gambler pushes his luck too far, and one evening, in a market town thick with harvest coin and heavy-handed law, the dice finally turned. He had marked a bishop's clerk, a foolish, wine-blushed man with a bulging purse and no sense of risk. The game was quick, too quick, the win too clean. And the next morning the town's bailiff came knocking with boots, blade and a warrant bearing the king's seal. The gambler was dragged to the square, wrists bound, clothes muddied. The crowd gathered fast, locals who had seen him drink in their taverns and win just a bit too often. In the centre of the square, a makeshift table was set. The trial, as it was called, would be public. Swift. Medieval justice was not known for nuance. A priest muttered that dice were the devil's bones. A woman spat and said he'd once stolen her brother's coin, though no one could remember if her brother ever had any. The bailiff read the charges aloud: deception, dishonest gaming, possible blasphemy. The last one was added, the gambler suspected, because it made the sentence easier to sell. He stood silent through it all. He had no lawyer, no defence. Just a slight smile that tugged at the edge of his mouth. Not arrogance, not even defiance, but the weariness of a man who'd heard this song before. A constable brought forward the dice. The clerk's trembling hands held the cup. The gambler's tools laid bare, one heavier than the other, the weight just enough to turn the game when needed. Guilty, of course. He expected no less. The punishment? Not the gallows. He wasn't that famous, nor the stocks. Too small a town to bother. Instead, a branding, a hot iron pressed into the palm of his left hand, a mark that would tell future innkeepers and magistrates, this man is a cheat. He didn't scream, just watched the steam rise from his flesh, eyes locked on the smoke curling skyward. The pain was sharp but not unfamiliar. What hurt more was knowing he could never play clean again, not that he ever had. They let him go at dusk, coinless, bruised and marked. He walked until his shadow disappeared in the forest behind the town, and as the trees swallowed the road, he whispered to no one in particular. They never said anything about the right hand. And in the pouch tucked beneath his belt, a second set of dice, lighter, sharper, waiting. The Great Fair, when luck met legends. Once a year, in the dustiest month before the harvest, the roads would fill with carts, banners, and the stink of ambition. The Great Fair had come. Held beyond the walls of cities too proud for chaos, these fairs were wild sanctuaries, half market, half madness. Merchants hawked saffron and sausages, barbers offered bloodletting alongside beard trims, and acrobats balanced sins atop stilts. But beneath the ribbons and roasted boar, in shaded corners of crowded tents, a different kind of trade thrived. The trade of illusion, sleight, and risk. The gambler knew this place. It was where men like him went when they needed both cover and competition. At the fair, every town had its cheat, every wagon a trickster, and every game was rigged, just in someone else's favour. He arrived with little more than a coin and a smile, and within hours he'd earned the attention of the wrong people. There was Ravel, a man known for switching cups faster than a priest changed his sermon. There was Elena of the 9 Rings, who could flip a deck between her fingers without drawing breath. And somewhere among the crowds moved the Black Glove, a figure whispered about but rarely seen, a man who'd never been caught but always remembered. At night, the real games began. Beneath oil lanterns and smoke-thick air, the cheats played not for coin, but for pride. One-on-one games, watched by silent crowds, the rules ever shifting. One round of dice, one of cards, one of sheer nerve. The gambler faced Elena first. Her smile was bright, her hands brighter. He won. Barely. But it cost him the watch from his boot and a bruise he didn't remember getting. Then came Ravel. Faster than story said, he lost, quietly. But he shook the gambler's hand, whispered, "Black Glove watches you now," and vanished into the wine-dark crowd. And then, just before dawn, the final game. No stage, no rules. Just a figure in a dark coat, hands gloved, voice low, one throw, my dice, you call it. The gambler hesitated, not from fear, but from awe. He'd spent a life pretending to be the legend. Now he was sitting across from one. He called high. The dice clattered. A pause. Snake eyes. He smiled. Would have cheated myself too. No one remembers who won. The coins disappeared, the crowd melted. But years later, in faraway inns, gamblers still speak of that night. Of the fair where luck was a spectator and skill wore a black glove. Maps and marks, where cheats are welcome, There were places on no official map marked not by ink but by whispers. If you were a gambler, a trickster, or someone who knew how to make a coin multiply without arithmetic, these were the ports in the storm, places where the law blinked slowly. They weren't always dens of darkness. Some were inns ordinary to the untrained eye, but hiding back rooms where men dealt in loaded dice and counterfeit coin. Others were bathhouses that never asked questions, or markets where dealers traded marked decks alongside dried figs and leeches. And if you knew how to read them, there were signs marked carved into beams or shutters. A bent nail near a doorway, a ring of wax under a tavern stool. It meant, cheats welcome here, but only the clever ones. The gambler kept a mental map. London South Bank, near the river's bend, where a toothless man named Farrell ran games no one ever truly won. Bruges, outside the old walls where women in red cloaks dealt cards like they were reading your sins. A ruin in Toulouse, known only to those who could read chalk symbols on its stones. There, once a month, the boldest played, blindfolded, for wagers of silence or secrets. But not all marked places were friendly. Some lured cheats only to strip them bare. One gambler told of a town in Bavaria where a smiling mayor ran the best games, and by morning every stranger had disappeared. Another spoke of a village in the Pyrenees where everyone was too kind, the odds too perfect, and the dice, it was said, rolled with a mind of their own. Still, the roads between those places were lifeline, a network of refuge, rivalry, and risk. The gambler knew them all, or at least claimed to, and wherever he went he carried chalk in his boot and a broken die in his belt, just in case he had to leave a sign behind. And though he never said it aloud, he preferred those unmarked nights, when two players locked eyes in silence, marked a line on the table, and began. No stakes spoken, no rules declared, just the rhythm of the game and the quiet understanding that in this place, for now, they both belonged. He never planned for a grand finale. Gamblers rarely do. There's no farewell toast, no final applause. Just one day, the dice grow quiet, the faces blur, and your hands feel slower than the room. He sat by a fire in an inn he didn't recognize, though the chairs creaked the same and the stew smelled familiar. He had played earlier, of course. A few harmless hands, a soft touch of the deck, a joke that made someone laugh louder than the truth deserved. He'd even won. Not much, just enough to buy silence for the night. Marjorie, no, not that Marjorie, but they always felt like her. Brought him ale, he nodded thanks, counted his coins by habit, and for the first time in years, didn't pocket the best marked one. There was a boy by the hearth, watching, not staring, not studying, just seeing. The gambler raised his cup in greeting, the boy raised his back, cautious but curious. He thought of the letter again, the one he never sent, the name he never signed, the promises he never kept. He thought of the bard with the broken lute, the goat under the table, the barmaid with eyes sharper than daggers, the fair, the fires, the stones marked with wax, and he smiled, because none of it lasted, but it had all been real, for a night, for a trick, for a breath, and maybe that was the game all along, not to win, not to escape, but to play. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and somewhere in the quiet corner of the room, the dice rolled once more. Not on a table, not by hand, but in memory, in myth, a gambler, a cheat, a man with no name, still playing somewhere. The innkeeper's debt. There is a new chill in the common room, a cold that has nothing to do with the draught from the door. It radiates from a man standing in the corner. a man whose armor is too polished, suggesting it has seen more inspections than battles. He is the new captain of the town watch, and he watches the room, not as a protector, but as a man cataloguing firewood, deciding what is worth burning and what is already ash. The usual noise of the inn, the clatter of mugs, the low murmur of conversation, the boastful laughter seems to falter and shrink whenever his gaze passes over it. The gambler, sitting in his usual shadow, feels the shift in rhythm. It is like a dropped beat in a familiar song, a jarring silence where there should be noise. He assesses the captain not as a man, but as a problem. The posture is stiff with unearned authority. The eyes are cold, but also impatient. This is not a patient hunter. He is a dog barking for his supper. Later, the steam and sizzle of the kitchen offer a temporary refuge. Marjorie moves with a forced, brittle purpose, her knuckles white as she grips a wooden spoon. She doesn't look at the gambler when she speaks, her eyes fixed on a bubbling pot of something that might be stew. "He calls my patrons rats," she says, her voice a low rumble, barely audible over the fire's crackle. He says the inn needs a cleaner name, and that a clean name costs coin. The gambler watches her shoulders, which are slumped with a weariness that goes beyond a long day's work. This is the weight of survival. For years, their arrangement has been unspoken. He is the spider who spins webs in her rafters, and she is the innkeeper who knows that spiders keep the flies away. He draws coin and trouble in equal measure, and she provides a place where his kind of trouble can be quietly managed. The spoon still's in the pot. He wants me to pay for the right to do business, or he will have his men empty this place for good. That evening, the gambler arranges the game. He doesn't invite the captain directly, he simply starts a game with the foolish squire and a talkative merchant, making the laughter a little too loud, the clink of coins a little too enticing. As expected, the captain approaches, a sneer on his lips, ready to observe the depravity. The gambler looks up, his expression one of polite deference. Perhaps the captain would honour us? A game of skill? To show us how it's done? The hook is set. For the next hour, the gambler orchestrates a symphony of humiliation. He lets the captain win just enough to feed his arrogance, then uses that arrogance against him. He reads the man's tells, a twitch of the jaw, a tapping finger, and plays into them, making the captain feel outwitted by fools. He contrives a situation where the squire, in his drunkenness, appears to have outsmarted the captain on a crucial hand. The room fills with stifled laughter. The final act is not a victory, but a carefully engineered accident, a stumble, a spilled mug of dark ale that soaks the captain's pristine uniform. The man stands, his face a mask of fury, too proud to rage and too humiliated to stay. He leaves without a word, the debt to the innkeeper paid in silence. The pilgrim's game. Long after the last game has ended and the tables have been wiped clean, a figure remains by the embers of the fire. He has been there for hours, a still point in the turning world of the inn. He is a pilgrim, his cloak caked with the dust of a dozen shires, his face a roadmap of sun and wind. He nurses a single cup of water, and his presence is a quiet rebuke to the room's usual ambition. The gambler has tried to read him, as is his habit, but has found nothing to hold. The man has no tells, no nervous tics, no greedy glint in his eye. He doesn't watch the games with envy or the serving girl with longing. He simply is. His stillness is not a strategy. It feels like a destination. The gambler, a man whose entire existence is based on movement, on staying one step ahead, feels an unfamiliar unease. He is looking at a language he cannot speak. The pilgrim turns his head, his gaze meeting the gambler's not with a challenge, but with a simple acknowledgement. "You play games of chance," the pilgrim says, his voice raspy from the road. "I have been playing one my entire life, a game against memory." He reaches into a small pouch and pulls out a single, smooth stone, grey and ordinary. He places it on the rough-hewn table. "I will tell you a story, a true one. When I am finished, you will pick up this stone, you will feel its weight, and you will tell me if it is the weight of a sin or just the weight of a stone." The gambler stares. There is no coin, no prize. The wager is perspective. The stakes are meaning itself. He feels the familiar urge to refuse, to walk away from a game he cannot rig, but a deeper, older curiosity holds him in his seat. He nods. The pilgrim story is not one of murder or grand betrayal. It is a story of a promise made to a childhood friend, a promise to return to their village after a single year of seeing the world. But the world was larger than he knew, and 1 year became 10 and then 20. When he finally returned, the friend was long gone. The village had changed, and the promise was a ghost that had haunted his every step since. As he finishes speaking, the only sound is the soft hiss of the embers. The gambler looks at the stone on the table. He doesn't pick it up. He knows that to touch it would be to accept the role of judge, a role he has spent his life avoiding. He looks at the pilgrim, at the endless road in his eyes, and understands. He stands, gives a slight bow of his head, and leaves the stone where it lies, its weight unmeasured. He climbs the stairs to his cot, the silence of the pilgrim's story far heavier than any purse of gold he has ever won. A ghost at the table. He sees the hands first. In a noisy, smoke-filled tavern in a town with no name, he notices a pair of hands fumbling with a deck of cards. They are slow, unsteady, the skin thin as parchment, but there is a ghost of a movement in them, a flicker of a shuffle, a muscle memory of a palm that is achingly familiar. His eyes travel up the arms to a stooped figure, a man with a thin shock of white hair and eyes that seem to be looking at a world that vanished years ago. Cold dread, colder than any winter night, washes over the gambler. It is Elias, his mentor, the man who had turned a hungry orphan into a master of the game, the man he had thought dead, or at least faded into legend. Now he is just an old man, a spectre at a cheap table, about to lose his last few coins to a pair of sneering wool merchants. Moving as if in a dream, the gambler takes the empty seat at the table. Elias squints at him, a flicker of confusion in his clouded eyes, but no recognition. The game begins. The gambler plays not against one man, but 3. His true opponents are the wool merchants, but his purpose is to protect the ghost. It is the most intricate performance of his life. He subtly signals Elias's bluffs to the others with a glance, then wins the pot himself to prevent them from taking it. He folds on a strong hand to let Elias win a small, confidence-boosting amount. He becomes a shield, a buffer, using his skills not to fleece, but to protect. The merchants grow frustrated, seeing him as an unpredictable fool, never realizing they are puppets in a play written only for an audience of one, a man who doesn't even know he's watching. The game winds down. The merchants, tired of the strange ebb and flow, cash out and leave with a grumble. Elias is left with a small pile of coins in front of him, more than he started with. He stares at it, a slow, bewildered smile on his face, attributing it to a rare turn of luck. He scoops the coins into his pouch, his movements clumsy. The gambler stands. He places a silver coin of his own on the table. "For the stew," he says, his voice a low murmur. Elias looks up, about to protest, but the gambler is already turning away, melting back into the shadows of the inn. He does not look back. To be recognized would be to force the ghost to acknowledge what it has become. It is better to leave the legend intact, even if only in the old man's fading memory. The flawed coin. The inn is asleep. The only light is from a single sputtering candle stub on his small table. This is the gambler's quiet ritual, the closing of the day's ledger. He lays out his tools, the deck with its softly curled corners, the dice with their almost imperceptible weighting, and the day's winnings. He counts the coin not by sight but by feel. His fingertips, more sensitive than any scale, glide over the metal. 1, 2, 3. His fingers pause. There is a coin that feels wrong. To the eye, it is perfect. The king's face is clear, the edges are sharp, but it is the silence of it that gives it away. It doesn't have the dense, satisfying weight of true silver. When he lets it fall softly onto the wood, the resulting clink is hollow, a dead note in a familiar song. A slow smile spreads across his face in the flickering light, not of anger, but of professional respect. Someone else was playing a game in this inn, and he had just discovered the board. The next day is a performance of inaction. The gambler does not play. He sits by the fire nursing a cheap ale, appearing to be resting, but his eyes are working. He is not watching the cards, he is watching the currency. He watches every transaction. The farmer paying for bread, the squire settling his bill, the merchant buying a round of drinks. His gaze eventually settles on a quiet, unassuming man who trades in spices and salt. A man who sits on the edge of the room and rarely speaks. He notices the man has 2 pouches, one for receiving payment, another smaller one from which he pays for his own small things. The gambler watches him pay for a new leather strap, using coins from the second pouch. He sees the briefest hesitation in the strap maker's eyes as he accepts them, and he knows. The spice trader isn't winning at the tables. He is using the inn as a laundry for his false silver. That evening, a quiet game of dice begins. The spice trader is there, playing for low stakes. The gambler joins. When it is his turn to pay for a lost round, he reaches into his pouch and pulls out the flawed coin. He does not slam it down. He places it gently in the center of the table, his finger resting on it for a moment longer than necessary. He looks at the spice trader, his expression perfectly neutral. The trader's eyes dart down to the coin, and for a fleeting second, raw panic flashes across his face, quickly masked. A silent conversation passes between the 2 men in the space of a heartbeat. The trader gives a nearly invisible nod. He reaches out, sweeps up the coins, including the flawed one, and stands. The hour is late, he murmurs to the table. My apologies. He leaves the inn without looking back. The gambler has not earned a single coin. He has earned something far more valuable: leverage, and the quiet satisfaction of having won a game that no one else even knew was being played. The storm's truce. It began not with thunder, but with a change in the light. The afternoon sun, already weak, was swallowed by a bruised, purple-grey sky that pressed down on the roof of the inn. The wind began to moan, a low, mournful sound that crept through the cracks in the walls. The goat under the table stopped chewing and stood up, its ears twitching. A moment later, the first heavy drops of rain hit the thatched roof, sounding like stones being thrown. Then, the deluge. Rain fell in a solid, roaring sheet, blurring the world outside the windows into a watery chaos. The innkeeper, with a grunt of effort, slid the heavy wooden bar across the main door. The sound echoed through the room with a deep finality. The world had shrunk. Their universe was now four walls, a fire, and the sound of the storm raging against them. With the door barred, the usual currents of the inn ceased to flow. There were no new arrivals to size up, no departures to wager on. The game stopped, the cards left untouched. A strange truce settled over the room. The air, usually thick with suspicion and ambition, was now filled only with the smell of wet wool and wood smoke. Men who had been rivals an hour before now huddled on the same bench, sharing the warmth of the fire. The boastful squire fell silent, his eyes wide as he watched the storm. A travelling merchant began to tell a quiet story of his childhood, his voice barely a whisper above the wind. The gambler sat apart, observing. He felt like a musician whose instrument had been taken away. His skills, reading a glance, sensing a bluff, manipulating a desire, were useless here. They were all just people, waiting for the sky to quiet. Through the gloom, he saw a small family. A weaver, his wife, and their young daughter, huddled near the draftiest wall. The child was shivering, her thin cloak offering little protection from the creeping cold. The gambler watched them for a long time. He felt no professional angle, no opportunity. There was only the simple fact of the cold and the shivering child. He rose, the movement slow and deliberate. He went to his pack and took out the wool blanket he saved for the most bitter nights on the road. He walked over to the family and, without a word, draped it over the small girl's shoulders. The mother looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise and a dawning gratitude. He simply nodded and returned to his seat, feeling the cold air on his back now, a new and unfamiliar sensation. The dawn came quietly. The storm had broken, leaving behind a world that felt washed clean and utterly still. A pale, watery sunlight filtered through the windows, illuminating the sleeping forms in the common room. The truce was over. One by one, people began to stir, the memory of their shared vulnerability fading with the night. The merchant was already calculating his losses from the delay. The squire was boasting about how he hadn't been scared at all. The world was putting its masks back on. The gambler sat up, his back stiff. He reached for his deck of cards, the familiar weight a comfort in his hand. He began to shuffle, the soft, rhythmic sound a return to the life he knew. But as he watched the dust motes dance in the morning light, he could still feel the phantom weight of a blanket, given for no reason at all. The embers of the day. Upstairs, in the shared darkness of the sleeping loft, the world has shrunk to the size of a straw mattress. The sounds from the common room below have faded one by one. The laughter first, then the stories, then the last clink of a mug being set down on the counter. He heard Marjorie's soft footsteps, the slide of the heavy bar across the door, and finally the snuffing of the last candle, which plunged the entire inn into a profound and settled dark. Now the only sounds are the quiet ones. The soft sigh of the wind under the eaves, the occasional sleepy murmur from a stranger nearby, the slow, rhythmic breathing of a room full of tired souls. The air is thick with the smell of old wood, stale ale, and the faint, lingering memory of the day's stew. He lies on his back, his hands behind his head, and stares up at a ceiling he cannot see. The day's accounts are closed, the coins are in his pouch, their weight familiar and cold. But it is not the coins he counts now in the stillness of the night. Instead, he shuffles the cards of memory. He sees the captain's face, flushed with pride before the fall. He hears the quiet weight in the pilgrim's voice. He feels the phantom chill of seeing Elias, a ghost of his own future. He remembers the silent treaty made over a flawed coin and the simple, uncalculated warmth of a gifted blanket. These were the real hands he played today, the games with stakes far higher than silver. He won some and lost some, and for some he still doesn't know the rules. He realizes that the most valuable things he took from the day were the ones that made his pouch no heavier. They were just whispers, textures, and silences, added to the worn deck of his life. He lets the memories drift and fade, like smoke from a dying fire. His focus narrows, drawing windward until all that is left is the gentle rise and fall of his own chest. Inhale, exhale, the first and final rhythm, the only game that cannot be rigged. The night is deep. The inn is quiet. The road will still be there in the morning, with a new town, a new table, a new set of faces. But that is a story for another day. For tonight, the wagers are done, the tricks are put away, the performance is over. And here, in the shared, anonymous dark, there is only the quiet promise of rest. A final, silent bet is placed, not on cards, not on dice, but on the deep and dreamless sleep that waits just beyond the next breath. And the inn at rest, the gambler sleeps, but the inn itself breathes around him. Downstairs, in the common room, a profound stillness has taken hold. The fire, once a roaring centre of light and warmth, is now a bed of softly glowing embers, pulsing with a faint, sleepy red. The shadows it casts are long and gentle, no longer dancing but resting, draped over empty chairs and overturned stools. The smell of spilled ale and pipe smoke has settled into the wooden beams, mingling with the permanent scent of old grease and damp earth. A single mouse, grown bold in the silence, darts from under a bench, its tiny claws making an almost inaudible scratching sound on the floorboards as it scavences for a fallen crumb. The day's chaos has resolved into this perfect, quiet tableau, a silent testament to the stories told and the coins lost. The air in the sleeping loft is a chorus of soft sounds. It is the sound of humanity at its most vulnerable. Near the far wall, the weaver, whose child the gambler had covered, snores with a deep, saw-like rhythm, a sound of honest exhaustion. A young squire, so full of boasts just hours before, whispers a woman's name in his sleep, his voice thick with a longing he would never admit in the daylight. Someone coughs, a dry, muffled sound quickly suppressed. The breathing of a dozen strangers rises and falls in an uneven, gentle tide. Each breath is a small flag of truce, a temporary surrender to the night. In sleep, there are no merchants, no squires, no gamblers. There are only bodies, seeking warmth and a brief escape from the weight of their own lives. One set of footsteps is still awake. Marjorie, the innkeeper, moves through the dark common room like a ghost in her own home. She checks the bar on the door one last time, her calloused hand resting on the wood for a moment. Her gaze sweeps across the empty tables, her mind doing a final silent accounting of the day, not of coin, but of moods, of tensions, of glasses broken and tempers soothed. She looks up towards the sleeping loft where the quiet sounds of her patrons drift down. She knows their secrets, their debts, their small victories and their loud defeats. She is the keeper of this small, messy world. With a soft sigh that is part fatigue and part resignation, she makes her way to her own small cot behind the kitchen, leaving the inn to its dreams and its ghosts. The world outside the walls. Beyond the inn's barred door, the town itself is asleep. The moonlight is a pale silver wash over the cobblestones of the empty square. It illuminates the pillory, which stands like a lonely skeletal tree, its purpose forgotten in the deep of the night. The shops are dark, their shutters drawn like closed eyelids. The baker's oven is cold, the blacksmith's hammer is silent, the weaver's loom is still. The only movement is a stray cat, a sleek shadow gliding along the edge of a wall, its passage marked only by the faintest disturbance in the dust. The town, by day a bustling hive of commerce and argument, has become a quiet, empty stage, waiting for the sun to raise the curtain once more. High on the town walls, a lone watchman makes his slow patrol. His footsteps are a solitary, rhythmic counterpoint to the silence. The metal tip of his spear scrapes softly against the stone walkway. He does not look for invaders or armies. He looks for the glint of an accidental fire, for the sound of a drunken brawl, for any small tear in the fragile fabric of the night's peace. He pulls his cloak tighter against the damp chill that rises from the sleeping fields below. His thoughts are not of glory, but of the warm bed he will return to at dawn, of his children's faces, of the simple, dull ache in his feet. He is a guardian not of a fortress, but of 1,000 fragile dreams. And beyond the walls, the great dark wilderness breathes. The forest is a solid wall of blackness, a place of rustles and snaps, and the soft hoot of an owl that a waking man would never hear. In the wide open fields, a low mist clings to the ground, silvered by the moon, making the land look like a silent, ghostly sea. A fox, its coat the colour of a dying flame, pauses at the edge of the woods, its sharp eyes fixed on the distant, sleeping town. The world of nature is ancient and indifferent. It does not care for the gambler's coin, the lord's ambition, or the watchman's vigil. It simply waits, breathing in the quiet and holding its own dark secrets. The anatomy of a medieval dream. In the shared loft, the farmer, whose hands are calloused and whose face is etched by the sun, dreams of weather. He dreams of a gentle, soaking rain that nourishes his fields but does not flood them. He dreams of his prize ox, its breathing steady and strong, free from sickness. His anxieties are earthy and solid. His nightmares are of drought, of blight, of the Lord's tax collector arriving a week too early. His slumber is a continuation of his waking toil, a restless negotiation with the soil and the sky. He does not dream of gold or glory. He dreams of having just enough. In his own fine house, the cloth merchant who lost to the gambler dreams of numbers. He dreams of long, scrolling parchments filled with figures that add up in his favour. He dreams of his ships, their sails full, cresting a calm blue sea, their hulls laden with silks and spices. His nightmares are of pirates, of storms, of a king's whim that could render his cargo worthless. He feels the imagined weight of his lance, the thunder of his horse's hooves, the imagined roar of a crowd. His dreams are loud and colourful, full of a future he hopes to seize. They dream of what they wish to gain or what they fear to lose. And the gambler? What does he dream of? Perhaps he does not dream at all. Perhaps for him, sleep is just a quiet, black emptiness, a necessary pause between one calculated day and the next. Or perhaps his dreams are a chaotic shuffle of all the days that have come before. He dreams of faces that blur into one another, the desperate, the proud, the foolish. He dreams of cards that have no markings, of dice that never stop rolling. He dreams of a road that stretches on forever through an endless succession of towns that all look the same. His sleep is not a rest, but a continuation of the journey, a restless wandering through the back alleys of his own mind. The slow turn toward dawn. The deepest part of the night is not its middle, but the moment just before its end. Long after midnight, the darkness in the sleeping loft changes. It is no longer a thick, absolute black. It softens at the edges, thinning to a deep, dark indigo. The stars, once sharp and brilliant, begin to fade, washed out by a light that is not yet visible. A new cold settles into the room. The last shiver of the night before the sun's warmth begins its slow return. It is a quiet, transitional time, a pause between the world of dreams and the world of waking. It is the hour when sleep is at its heaviest. The first sound of the new day is not a human one. From a distant tree, a single bird calls out, its song tentative and questioning, a silver needle stitching through the fabric of the silence. In a nearby stable, a horse shifts its weight, its hooves making a soft, muffled thump in the hay. The inn's goat, sleeping soundly under a bench, lets out a soft, sleepy bleat. These are the first stirrings of life, the world's quiet engines beginning to turn. The town's rooster, perched high on a fence post, is still silent, but it feels the coming light in its bones, gathering its breath for the call that will shatter the peace. In his corner of the loft, the gambler shifts. He turns onto his side, pulling the scratchy blanket closer, his breathing deep and even. The coming dawn does not stir him. He is adrift in that final, peaceful depth of sleep, his mind free of cards and coin, his body given over completely to rest. The story of his day is over. The tales of the sleeping town are drawing to a close. All that remains is this profound stillness, this last, precious moment of peace. The world outside holds its breath, waiting for the first touch of the sun. But here, in the quiet dark, there is no need to wake. Not yet. There is only rest.